Today we're going to rank all the versions of Medusa in the media. The versions that appear in movies, TV shows, games, comics, books, basically everything. Which one is the most faithful to mythology? So let's get started. And to begin with, what is Medusa? Because we're going to rank them according to mythological accuracy, both in story and appearance. First of all, unlike what most people think, Medusa as a monster isn't pretty at all. In fact, she's ugly. She's scary. So much so that Percy himself, when he managed to decapitate Medusa's head, ran away in fear of her sisters, right? Stheno and Euryale, because they were terrible monsters. Another thing is that Medusa doesn't have a serpent's body, but rather human legs and bat wings. In her story, there's the Greek version, where she was always a monster. Then in the Roman version, we have that famous story where she was attacked in Minerva's temple by Neptune. Minerva turned her from a beautiful woman into a terrible monster. That's it. Let's go. The ranking starts with Medusa, my top choice, down to just Little Snake. It's just a cute way for me to say this version would be garbage. All right? Let's begin with Clash of the Titans, which is playing back there. It's from 1981. By the way, that Medusa there is extremely bizarre and creepy because it was all done in stop motion. And it might even seem a bit silly in the movie, but for me it worked really well because it gave a kind of weird vibe to the scene, which is exactly what Medusa should convey. This Medusa, from what I researched and from what I saw in the scenes too, she ends up adapting the Roman version, where Medusa was supposedly attacked by Neptune and so on. However, in the movie, they call Minerva and Neptune Poseidon and Athena, mixing them up with the Greek version, and Medusa has a serpent's body. And if I'm not mistaken, it was exactly this movie that kind of introduced Medusa in the form of a serpent to pop culture, and not with bat wings like in the original myth. And also, this Medusa ended up using a bow and arrow, which Medusa never used in mythology either. Because of these things, I'm not going to put her in the top ranking. However, I do think this Medusa is pretty creepy. I think it's the only one, maybe, that ends up adapting this side of Medusa in the versions I'm going to use here in the video, so that's why I'm going to leave her in the Medusa tier. But still, how could I not put the Medusa from Clash of the Titans at least in the great tier, right? After all, those guys influenced how we see the myth nowadays. It's very rare for you not to see Medusa in her serpent form. In fact, sometimes I even think that they ended up getting inspired by other legends to give Medusa that form, rather than by the original Greek myth of Medusa itself. It's because, for example, among the Slavs, there are some versions where Baba Yaga appears in a serpent form, and there's the yokai from Japan with that form as well, which leads us to that famous thought, right? Could it be that all legends, all mythologies, are actually the same story told in different ways? The book I wanted to recommend to you that actually uses this idea is Cosmogonino Esquecido by Adam Venture, which, besides being a beautiful and pleasantly scented book, just look at it. This isn't just a simple story, okay? It will address, for example, the idea that dinosaurs eventually evolved into dragons. Why? Why? Odin, the Norse god, supposedly hid under the guise of a druid named Merlin. And even a war, look at this, a war between Zeus and Lucifer for dimensional control of everything. So, if you like Tolkien or Neil Gaiman, give this book a chance. It's really cool. The link will be in the pinned comment. Take a look there. It's worth it. Bye. The next Medusa here is also from Clash of the Titans, but from the 2010 movie, which is similar in concept, but not really, because in this case we have the difference of a few million in investments. The story is basically the same. The Medusa's lair is also pretty similar between the two, but in this case here in 2010, Medusa is much less monstrous and is made completely in CGI. And she's also prettier than the Medusa from 1981 because the Medusa in the old movie was extremely ugly and scary. Here, she's actually kind of cute. Even in this form, with the $1 million CGI, she ended up being much less scary than the Medusa from 1981. Well, here they also adapt the Roman version of the story, right? With Medusa being attacked by Neptune and also being transformed by Minerva. Medusa here also uses a bow and arrow, but she's also kind of stealthy, walking around the lair, killing people, turning them into stone. He defeated her in a way that's kind of similar to the classic version too, with Perseus using the shield to see her reflection. But in the classic one, Perseus still has more hair. Here he doesn't have as much, he shaved it. Looks like a Vasco striker. He's hiding behind a pillar in the classic, right? Then he sees her coming at him, coming from here, and he cuts her. But here, he does something kind of like a superhero, like in anime he jumps. But then he manages to cut off her head. Anyway, this version here is pretty cool. It feels nostalgic, but I think it's below the 1981 one because their Medusa is really a monster. Here, she's more like a little monster.
All she sees is the statue of a gigantic serpent, silently guarding the door to the tomb of the emperors. She smiles. The weapon is the key. Cassiopeia brings herself. She picks up the weapon to come. She fits it into the lock. The Guardian's curse has been activated. The stone serpent is alive. She holds Cassiopeia in her fangs. The venom burns her flesh just like acid.
Well, the next Medusa we're going to talk about here is the Medusa from LOL, who doesn't necessarily have the same name, right? But it ends up being an adaptation one way or another. In this case, it's Cassiopeia. And Cassiopeia, according to the story in LOL, which is kind of confusing because it changes a lot, would be the daughter of a noble family and the sister of Katarina, who is an assassin. She always used her intelligence and also her beauty as a diplomatic weapon. But she ended up getting involved with the Black Rose, with the cult, a secret cabal there. And because of that, she decided to go on an expedition in Shurima, which is basically the Egypt of LOL. She ended up hiring a guide named Severe, and they entered a tomb. And Cassiopeia was searching for secret power there, so that with it, she could maintain her family's supremacy. And inside that tomb, she ended up betraying Severe and leaving her to die. But she also ended up being bitten by a guardian there in the form of a serpent. And this poison turned her into a Medusa-style monster with the body of a serpent from the waist down and a human body from the waist up. She also has Medusa's power, which is to turn others into stone with her gaze. In fact, this power is her ultimate in the game. The story is pretty cool. It works well for LOL, but I think it's more of an adaptation of Medusa from Clash of the Titans than from actual Greek mythology, because she doesn't even have the snake hair or the bad attitude. And it seems like her power isn't exactly like that. Like, you look at Cassiopeia and turn to stone. No, she has to activate the power. In Greek mythology, that's not how it is, right? Just looking at Medusa turns you to stone, so I'll put her in the middle. I think that's a good choice. Now let's go to Smite, where we have a very faithful Medusa, at least in her Roman version of the story, which is basically the same thing. Medusa is a priestess in the temple of Athena who ended up attracting the interest of the god Poseidon, who tried to possess her inside the temple. Athena didn't like it, and instead of punishing Poseidon, she ended up going after Medusa and transformed her, who until then was a beautiful woman, into a monster with snake hair and a snake body as well. And so it's actually kind of sad because Smite had the opportunity to make a really cool Medusa, completely different from the others, adapting her classic form with bat wings, human legs, and a monstrous face with snake hair. They played it safer and adapted the Freddy and Tux version. But one thing I noticed they did differently, actually something interesting I noticed they did differently, is that Medusa in the game wears a mask, kind of like Dr. Doom's mask from Marvel, to hide her face, which I thought was actually kind of cool. But even with that detail, I found this Medusa kind of bland. Neither good nor bad, just another one. Next.
I'm already going with this body.
You probably understand Castlevania much better than I do. If I say something wrong or silly here, feel free to correct me in the comments, all right? But from my research, from what I understand, the heads that appear in Castlevania, the Medusa heads, aren't exactly Medusa herself, but actually the guardians of Dracula's castle, and monsters that appear whenever chaos arises. But from what I've seen, there is indeed a certain connection with Medusa from Greek mythology, because in one of the games, she's near a statue of Athena that's crying blood. It's a Medusa that works fine in Castlevania, but compared to the others here, she's more like a small snake. Next up is the Medusa from Assassin's Creed, in this case Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But this Medusa might even look cool because if you look up her fight in the game, you'll see that she jumps, she has 2 legs, she does this cool little thing, it's different. A unique adaptation, which is already great. However, if you look at her story, and also the story of the other gods in Assassin's Creed, you'll end up getting disappointed because actually, these gods, these mythological characters aren't exactly, say, an extremely advanced society called the Isu. And Medusa, in this case, would be an experiment made by the Isu who were trying to create hybrid creatures. And Medusa's transformation happens through an artifact called the Serpent's Curse, or something like that. In other words, Medusa herself isn't actually a creature, but a curse. Whoever got their hands on that artifact would end up becoming Medusa, which is kind of a letdown if you think about it, right? But just the fact that this Medusa doesn't have a serpent's body, I think that's already, a good adaptation, okay? Even though this whole advanced society thing is pretty boring. Well, next up is the Medusa from Perseus the Invincible from 1963, which is an Italian-Spanish film. If you search for this movie on Google, you'll see that its description has the following line. It's loosely inspired by the mythological story of Perseus and Medusa. And by loosely inspired, I mean it has almost nothing to do with it. In fact, we do have the battle between Perseus and Medusa, as you can see here. This here is Perseus. He's in Medusa's lair, and there are a bunch of people here who have already been turned to stone. But the Medusa in this one, which is this creature you're seeing here, yeah, that's her eye right there. It's a creature that's not even inspired by her Clash of the Titans form, nor by her mythological form with wings and human legs. That Medusa there is just a thing. She looks much more like a tree with an eye in the middle. Extremely bizarre. And this Medusa, according to her story, has nothing to do with gods, with Athena, Poseidon, nothing. It's simply a monster that exists there and attacks anyone who comes near her lair, which interestingly is very similar to her description in Greek mythology. And it's because of that and the courage they had to make a Medusa like this in the movie that I'm going to rate her as good.
Music. Suspenseful music.
The next one here is the Medusa from Percy Jackson, starting with the movie version, which according to her own words is her Roman mythology version. She says that she was very beautiful, had many suitors, until Athena and Poseidon came into her life. Poseidon attacked her in Athena's temple, so Athena turned her into a monster, which isn't even that monstrous. She only has snake hair and can turn people to stone, but lacks the monstrous face described in Greek mythology. Her death here is very similar to her death by Perseus, Percy the Titan Slayer, except in this case, Percy is Percy Jackson, and in the movie, he uses a cell phone to look at her reflection. It's not a shield or anything like that. It's just a cell phone that he holds and uses to look at her. And at one point, Percy ends up getting caught by Medusa, but he's saved by Annabeth, who shows up driving a truck. Anyway, there's a car there. It runs her over and Medusa grabs the cell phone, gets distracted looking at it. Then Percy comes up behind her and cuts off her head. It's a Medusa. Okay, she doesn't have a snake body. That's fine, but it was missing a monstrous face to really give that Gaetan vibe, and she's not scary at all. But it's okay, it's good, a good Medusa.
When I send your statues to Olympus, maybe my point of view will become even more clear.
Now, the Medusa from the series, to me, is extremely similar to the one from the movie, except for the fact that she doesn't die holding a cell phone. But it's the same story. It adapts the same version of Roman mythology, with Athena, Poseidon. But unlike the Medusa from the movie, she is killed when Annabeth shows up with the invisibility weapon and puts it on her. Then Percy can open his eyes and cut off Medusa's head. To me, they're about the same. Actually, the Medusa in the series is even more beautiful than the one in the movie. But as far as adaptations go, to me, they're on the same level. Both are okay, good. And now we're going to a cuter version of Medusa, which is the Medusa from the game Hades. Actually, you can't really tell if she's the Medusa from mythology or, I don't know, some other creature. But either way, she would be a shade there, which takes the form of a decapitated head of a Gorgon. She works as a housekeeper and also as a cleaner in Hades' house. She's always carrying a feather duster or moving frantically from one place to another, and she has social anxiety, just like me, and she's extremely shy and gets nervous in the presence of Zagreus. Many times she stutters or flies away quickly when the conversation gets too personal. And she's also extremely gossipy. During some of her breaks, she loves to share gossip about other residents of the House of Hades with Zagreus. So the game occasionally hints that Medusa is actually the original Medusa from Greek mythology, but after death. In the Codex, for example, it's mentioned that when Medusa was decapitated, probably by Perseus, her blood gave rise to the Gorgons that Zagreus faces in battle. Medusa is essentially the soul of the original creature, but she rarely discusses her past. She's just too cute, so I'll keep her as a little snake. Careful. And we also have the Medusa from the Powerpuff Girls, who in this case is Sedusa. Actually, she's not exactly Medusa, but she uses the Medusa archetype to achieve her goals. Usually, she ends up deceiving some man there with her beauty. Like in that episode where she dresses up, not really dresses up, right? She disguises herself as Miss Bellum and keeps flirting with the mayor, getting some time off. And during her time off, she robs banks and so on. In fact, in that episode, there are some extremely suspicious scenes, like this one, which I'm going to show on the screen.
Let me help you, sir.
And even though she doesn't have exactly snake hair, she can use her hair as a weapon too. But since she's not exactly Medusa, I'm going to put her in the little snake category too. In a way very similar to Sedusa, we have Marvel's Medusa there, who is the queen of the Inhumans. And actually, she doesn't have anything Medusa-like besides the name. The only thing she does that's similar to Medusa, and that's probably why she has that name, is that she uses her hair. She controls her hair a lot. To be honest, I didn't even know this creature existed. So I'm just going to leave it as a little snake. And moving on to DC, we actually have the mythological Medusa here. Here, Medusa ends up being adapted from her Roman version as well. She's the only one of her sisters who was born beautiful and all that. And after attracting Poseidon's desire and being seduced, she ended up being transformed into a monster by Athena. From what I've researched here, she started out as a villain for Batman, Batwoman, and Wonder Woman, where she kind of led an organization with her name to free her mother, who was the sea deity Sato. She was one of Batwoman's greatest supernatural threats, needing Wonder Woman's help. She has a petrifying gaze and Gorgon physiology. And besides the snake hair that has venom and acid, she has superhuman strength and durability. In some stories, she can become gigantic. And she is also immortal. Because she's mythological, right? She rarely dies for good. Usually, she's just banished to Tartarus. And apparently, in some stories, or at least in most of them, she ends up having human legs and not snake legs, which is already really cool. I really like this Medusa, so I'm going to keep her in order. We have the Medusa from Fate, which, as you can see on the screen, doesn't really have much of Medusa in her. And also, according to the story, in the Fate universe, Medusa and her sisters, who were Stheno and Euryale, were Greek deities who personified the ideal of human beauty. However, while her sisters were immortal and eternally young, being small and delicate, Medusa was born imperfect. She grew, she aged, and she possessed physical strength. Because she was the only one capable of fighting, she took on the role of guardian for her sisters. But human hatred and constant persecution corrupted her, turning her into the monster called Gorgon, who eventually devoured the sisters she loved. There's not much to say besides the name. She has almost nothing to do with Medusa, either in story or appearance. So, that's just how it is. In Shin Megami Tensei, they end up using the mythology story for Medusa herself. And then, her form depends a lot on the game. Sometimes she appears as a real monster, sometimes she has 2 legs, sometimes she has a serpent tail. It depends on the game. But I do think it's a great adaptation. However, now in Goryaphora, I tried to research more deeply into the story of Medusa, because the only thing I knew about Medusa in that game was that she appeared there when Aphrodite contacted Kratos, so that Kratos would kill Medusa and end up using the power of her head to petrify his enemies. The only thing I found about this Medusa is that she would be the leader of the Gorgons, leading her sisters, right? Stheno and Euryale, who also appear, but in other games. I think this Medusa is good, even with her serpent body and monstrous face as a mix of serpent and woman. I'll put her in the great category. If you watched the video up to this point, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and also like and share, and we'll see each other next time. Thanks. See you. Bye.